Alright, everyone out there in Music Land, Mike Heading here. I've got a short little music lesson for you today. I had a request from someone in the audience if I could put together kind of what he called a skills checklist. You know, kind of a way to evaluate your current skill level. And I started thinking about that and started thinking about how I would evaluate my own skill level. So I put together a list of 10 skills that I think are very crucial to know to be able to play music in any style. And we're going to talk about them, and I'm going to give you a little checklist where you can evaluate your skill in each of the sections and then kind of get an overall determination of your current skill level, okay? And I want to preface this lesson by saying that these ratings and skills are very, very subjective. So this is just something that I put together, something that I would use to assess my own skills, and you can 100% completely feel free to agree or disagree with these. You know, so if my rating system says you're a beginner and you think you're an intermediate, or mine says you're an intermediate and you think you're a beginner, totally fine. You're completely free to think of your skill level as whatever you want. But my goal in this lesson is not to criticize your current level or you know, discourage you, but really to encourage you to kind of fill those gaps in your playing. So think about those spots, those areas of your skills that you haven't developed. So I really want you to figure out on how to fill those gaps in your playing, because one thing I really want you to think about as a student, and this is especially important as you get further along in the process, is not just practicing things that you're already good at. It's very easy to fall into that rut, you know, maybe after you've been playing a couple years, to kind of just, you know, kind of play the things that you're already good at and not continue to improve. So I'm hoping this skills checklist can, again, help you find those spots in your playing where you still have gaps. So I want you to give yourself a rating 1 through 10 on each of these skills, and then you'll have a point in time of this is where I was at, you know, when I've been playing a year or 2 years, and then I'd encourage you to check in with this checklist, you know, every 6 months or every year, and you can see, you know, how you've improved and where you still need to improve. Okay, so let's get into the first of these 10 skills that you need to learn, and these skills are going to be applicable to any instrument. So I didn't make them instrument specific, okay, because I really wanted these to just be general music skills. Okay, so the first one is, and I want you to rate again 1 through 10. 10 being you're completely comfortable, you have no problem doing this skill, and 0 or 1 would be you have no experience doing this at all. And again, this is just your rating system, so be very honest with yourself. You don't need to inflate your numbers to show this to anyone else. Remember, this is just for you. So the first skill I've determined is your ability to play leads or solos from tabs or standard notation. So how quickly can you pick up a piece of music and just play it? Stumble your way through it if you need to. You know, how often do you get tripped up by, if you're playing banjo, let's say a roll or a slide or a technique? You know, if you can pick up and go through a piece of music fairly easily, give yourself a higher rating on the scale. If you stumble and struggle to get through a piece of music and it takes you a long time to get through a piece of music, then again, give yourself a lower number. So give yourself a rating on this skill level 0 to 10. And then the other thing I want you to think about if you need some points to advance this skill is think about looking further ahead in the tab or the piece of music, because this is incredibly helpful when you start playing faster. If you can only look a couple notes ahead, it's going to be hard to play faster. And my analogy for this is always like driving. So if you're driving 10 miles an hour, you only really have to look at the car right ahead of you, right? Because you're driving pretty slow. But if you're driving 60 or 70 miles an hour on the highway, they tell you to look a couple cars ahead because you're going that much faster. So same thing when you're playing a tab. You want to practice looking further ahead in the tab, and that'll allow you to be able to play faster. The other thing you'll just practice with this skill is the more tabs you pick up, the more pieces of music you pick up, the faster you're going to be able to interpret and understand a piece of music quickly. You'll have seen this skill or technique in a different song. And lastly, if you're only familiar with tab, one final skill you can develop is learning standard notation. So this is super helpful, especially if you play an instrument like banjo or mandolin. You know, you might eventually want to transcribe a solo from a different instrument that doesn't have tab. You know, you might not be able to find a piano tab or a cello tab. And part of what we'll talk about later on in this lesson is transcribing solos from other instruments, which can be super helpful in furthering your skills, okay? So that's skill number 1, your ability to quickly pick up a piece of music and play it. Do you get thrown off by techniques? Do you get thrown off by different roles or picking patterns? These are all the things I want you to think about when you give yourself a rating, okay? And remember, rate yourself 0 through 10. 0 means you really need to work on this skill, and 10 means you don't think you need to work on this skill at all. All right, so the second skill I want you to think about is your knowledge and ability to understand music theory. So to understand counting, to understand chords, to understand arpeggios, to understand scales. Does this stuff start making your head spin, or do you feel completely comfortable, you know, when I say what's the 1, 4, and 5 in the key of C, for example? If that throws you off, you know, then maybe music theory is a skill that you want to develop a little further. Because music theory is also essential to another skill that we're going to talk about, which is beginning to learn to improvise. These two skills go hand in hand, and the more knowledge you have in music theory, the better your ability to improvise. And so those two skills combine, and that's why it's really important to have an understanding of music theory. If you have an understanding of the ability to count, to create harmonies, to play scales, you're gonna be so far ahead of the game when it comes to understanding new pieces of music, playing along with music you've never heard of. So again, give yourself a rating of 0 to 10 on your ability to understand and your knowledge of music theory. And the third skill I want you to think about, and remember that these don't go in any order, so they're all equally valuable. So the first skill is not more important than the 10th skill. They're all equally valuable. But the third skill I want you to think about is playing backup. So I always say I think this is the least, you know, the most underdeveloped skill that I see students need to work on, especially beginning banjo students. Most of them can play a few leads pretty comfortably, but most of them get completely thrown off when you start thinking about playing backup. And so this is a really, really important skill. I always tell students in real life situations you're going to be playing backup probably about 95% of the time. So again, give yourself a rating 0 to 10. And again, some practice points that you can think about as you get more advanced. Start thinking about how you would back up specific instruments. So how would you back up a vocalist? How would you back up a fiddle player taking a solo? How would you back up a mandolin player taking a solo? So there's going to be specific backup techniques that you're going to want to use for each instrument. And obviously that gets more advanced and more nuanced. So if you're having trouble thinking of what you do to back up a guitar versus a mandolin, again, give yourself a little bit lower number on the scale, and that can be a skill that you can work on developing. The best way to practice backup is to go to real-life jam sessions, join a band or a church, you know, worship gospel group, and play along, or play along with the practice tracks. There's no substitute for playing with real people when you're trying to practice your backup. It's really, really hard to kind of hypothetically practice backup. So you need the practice tracks. You need someone really singing or playing guitar. And that's why I'd encourage you to get out there and jam and play with real people, because that's how you're going to develop the third skill, playing backup. All right, the fourth skill is learning by ear. So how quickly can you listen to a piece of music and start playing along, start picking out the melody, start picking out a harmony part to the melody? These are all skills on the spectrum of learning by ear. So give yourself a rating 0 to 10, and I'd encourage you to start with, if you want some practice points for this skill, start with seeing if you can first determine what key the song is in. So maybe take, you know, your bar chord or your you know, movable chord in whatever instrument you're playing. See if you can move it around the neck until you find a chord that sounds good. More advanced musician will be able to listen to a piece of music and start playing along instantly. Start listening and start picking out the melody to the song. Start playing backup that sounds good. And you're not reading off a piece of music. Reading off a piece of music is a skill of its own. That's a really great skill. And I think of it like if you're learning a language, learning to read off tab or music is like learning to read, you know, Spanish or French or English, right? And learning to play by ear is kind of learning to talk conversationally. So obviously both skills are very important. You need to be able to read in the new language, and you need to be able to converse freely in the new language. So think about both those skills. And learning by ear is something that takes time, and you got to do a lot of hunting and pecking, just like learning a new language. You gotta do a lot of talking and a lot of babbling before the words are going to come together and start making sense. So it might take you a while to figure out what key the first song you try and do it in. That might take you a whole bunch of time, and you can check your progress by going online and looking up the chords and seeing if you're right or wrong. But as you develop the skill, you're going to get faster and faster, and your ear is going to start instantly going to the key that the song is in, and you'll start being able to play along right away. So that's the fourth skill, learning by ear. Okay, the fifth skill is your ability to improvise. So how quickly can you just make up something on the spot that entertains you, entertains other people? Can you start playing a lick or start playing a chord progression that you just made up? Can you start making up some notes? If I start playing a chord progression, let's say I got my guitar, I start playing a G, C, D progression. Can you make up something that sounds good with those chords I'm playing? So that's your ability to improvise. And again, an absolutely crucial skill, especially if you're playing bluegrass or folk music, jazz, heavily improvisational music, blues music, again, heavily improvisational. So an absolutely crucial skill. And some practice points for this skill is start really small. Put yourself in a box. It's totally counterintuitive, but I found for students, if you just give them the whole fretboard or the whole instrument and say, hey, improvise, it's very easy to kind of get hung up and not know what to do. Whereas if you put yourself in a small box, okay, I'm just going to play 3 notes on this one string, and I'm going to mix those 3 notes up. Then you're going to be able to come up with something. So again, put yourself in a little bit of a box creatively to start, and you can always break that box or break those barriers as you get better, and eventually you'll get to where you can freely improvise all over the neck and, you know, play in the correct key or, you know, modify notes to create different tension and different release, which is all stuff you can do with improvising. So I said before that this skill goes hand in hand with your knowledge of music theory, so skill number 2. So you can improvise just randomly all over the neck, and that can be fun, but if you have knowledge of scales, chords, arpeggios, all that stuff is going to make your improvising kind of more coherent. So I really think your knowledge of music theory and your ability to improvise, those skills go hand in hand. So kind of keep that in mind when you're giving yourself a rating with skill number 5, the ability to improvise. All right, skill number 6 is your ability to write arrangements to popular songs. So could you take a song that you already know, let's say like a Cripple Creek or 9 Pound Hammer, a basic folk song, or Amazing Grace, and can you write your own arrangement to that song? And that's really the first step to being able to create your own music eventually, I think, is writing an arrangement to a song that you're already familiar with. Can you find the melody in a different octave? Maybe do the picking pattern or the roll pattern differently? You know, can you take my arrangement and twist it up a little bit to make it your own? So these are all skills that I want you to practice for this skill set. You know, and again, give yourself a rating from 0 to 10. If you feel like you can only play, you know, someone else's arrangement, then obviously you're going to be lower on the scale. If you can take a piece of my music or someone else's music and make it your own, then give yourself a higher rating. Another practice point you can do for this skill is once you've created your own arrangement of a song that you think you've got a good arrangement, go play it for your spouse or play it for your friend. See if they can tell what you're playing. So if they say, hey, that sounds like Amazing Grace, okay, yes, you're on the right track. If they say, hey, it sounds like Jingle Bells, then, you know, okay, let me go back to the workshop and revamp a little bit. And same with all these other skills. The first time you write your own arrangement, it's going to be the hardest. Trust me, I know from writing lots of tabs and lots of lessons, the first one is the hardest, and they get easier and easier as time goes on. Writing your own arrangements is a skill, just like learning rolls, just like learning picking, just like learning chords. If you don't practice it, you're not going to get better at it. So give yourself a rating on this skill, 0 to 10, and you'll see where you're at currently, and you'll see if this is an area you need to improve on. All right, for skill number 7, we have your ability to play in different styles and different genres of music. Because every good, really expert, advanced level player can play in different styles of music. You know, Bela Fleck can play classical music on the banjo. He can play jazz. He can play Scruggs-style banjo with the best of them. Chris Thile, again, mandolin, can play in every style. That's part of being an advanced player, is learning how to interpret music in different styles and different genres. So for banjo, for example, that has everything to do with playing in melodic style, knowing the difference between Scruggs style, single string, you know, being able to play jazz, being able to play blues, classical. And it doesn't mean you have to be able to play in every single genre, but again, give yourself a rating system. If you can only play, you know, Scruggs style traditional bluegrass banjo, yes, that's a great skill. But again, think of yourself as a well-rounded musician. you're going to have areas lacking in your skills if you can only do that one thing. And this will be where you have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone a little bit and start listening to lots of different styles of music. And we're in a great time in history right now where we have so much music accessible to us. You know, you can get Apple Music, you can get Spotify, you can go on YouTube, you know, type in classical playlist or blues playlist or jazz. You're going to find a whole bunch of music. You're going to get a whole bunch of stuff to get inspired to, and start thinking if you can interpret your instrument in those different styles. The better understanding you have of different styles, the more well-rounded you're going to be as a musician. So that's skill number 7, the ability to play in different styles and different genres. All right, so for skill number 8, we have, can you create your own licks and your own songs? So this is kind of an offshoot of being able to create arrangements of a popular song, but this kind of takes it one step further, and can you actually now create your own licks on your instrument? And that really comes from a deep understanding of the genre, of the style, and of the music theory that you're playing in. So again, you're combining a bunch of these other skills to create this other skill, being able to create your own licks and songs. Most advanced musicians either write their own instrumental music or singing, you know, vocal music as well. So that's another thing you can dip your toe into the water. Doesn't mean you have to start writing all these songs and, you know, spend your time writing choruses and verses, but just think about that as a skill. If you can't even create your own basic lick or verse or chord progression, again, this might be a skill that you want to develop a little bit. And a couple practice points for this lesson is maybe take a popular chord progression that you really love. Let's say you love the song Let It Be or something, you know, by the Beatles. See if you can take that chord progression, now write your own melody to it. Or see if you can take, you know, see if you can create your own chord progression. Put together a couple chords and see if you can create something that catches your ear and maintains your interest. And that's the basis for creating your own music. You have to start somewhere, and you have to start small. So that's a good way to start, is take a chord progression you already know, see if you can write a new interesting melody to that. So again, that's the 8th skill, is creating your own songs and licks, and give yourself a rating 0 to 10. All right, so for skill number 9, we have the number of tunes in your repertoire. So again, this is on a spectrum. If you know one tune and you know it really well, you know, that'd be a little bit lower rating. If you know hundreds of tunes, again, that'd be a higher rating. Most advanced musicians, you know hundreds, if not thousands of songs. So again, this is just building up your repertoire, and that takes time and practice. So a couple practice points for this lesson is, especially if you're playing bluegrass or jazz, you can get what's called a fake book, where it'll be just a huge book of all the popular standard songs in that genre, and a lot of times they'll have the chords, or a jazz fake book might have the basic melody that you can work off. They also have these for old-time fiddle tunes, like fiddle fake books, and these are a great way to just expand your knowledge of the songs in that repertoire. Another great way to do this is go to jam sessions. So if you go to a jam session, most times a jam session has the format of kind of like a song circle, where each person goes around and picks a song. So just by nature in that format, you're going to get introduced to a lot of new songs and new music that you haven't heard before. So give yourself a rating 0 to 10. You know, do you know hundreds of songs? Do you know just a few songs? And it doesn't have to be a one or the other, but again, think of this as a skill that you can practice. And remember, the first one's the hardest. Memorizing your first song is the most difficult. The more you practice it, the better you get at, just like every other skill you're working on. And lastly, the 10th skill that I want you to evaluate yourself on is your ability to jam or perform in public. So this is an incredibly crucial skill, because for most people, the end goal is to not just play music in your room by yourself. Again, I think of learning music like learning a language, and it's not that fun to just speak French or Spanish to yourself in your room by yourself. So I'd really encourage you to get out there, jam, play in public, join a band, go to a jam session, play on the street. I cut my teeth playing on the street in Madison, Wisconsin, you know, busking, playing on the street for tips. Great way to get over your stage fright, learn how to be entertaining, learn how to draw a crowd. Those are all skills you can work on, just like playing your instrument. Another skill that's incredibly important to work on is transferring stuff you know at your house to stuff you can play in public. I always tell my students and myself that those two things can be very different. You know, you can play a great solo on your own at your house, but when you get in front of a whole bunch of people, can you play that same solo? So one thing you can think about is simplifying your arrangements to be able to perform them in public, or part of it is just getting over the stage fright, getting over the nerves, learning how to deal with those nerves and the excitement of playing in front of people, and still practice being able to execute it. It's a skill like anything else. I mean, I can tell you from experience, my first time playing in front of people, I was very, very nervous, almost to the point of throwing up. So, you know, I was very low on the skill level of this skill. And I've improved to now where I'm extremely comfortable playing in front of people, and it doesn't bother me at all. So this is a skill just like all the other ones that you need to practice, and it only gets easier if you jump in and work on it. All right, so that's 10 skills. You can evaluate yourself on each one, 0 to 10, and give yourself a rating. Add them all up, and you'll have a score of up to 100. So my kind of range for each skill level is if your score lands from 0 to 50, you're still kind of in the beginner range. If your score lands from over 50 to about 85, you're still in the intermediate range. And if your score is over 85 to 100, you're in the advanced range. So why did I give them different weights? Why didn't I make them equal, right? 33, 33, you know, and, you know, right down the middle. Because it's the skills, you kind of have a point of what's called diminishing returns, where as you get better, it becomes harder to get that much better, right? Getting 1% better at a beginner level is easier than getting 1% better at an advanced level. And I did this, again, not to discourage you, but to help you think about where you are in the process. So if you're still a beginner, that doesn't mean, beginner doesn't mean bad, intermediate doesn't mean good, advanced, you know, it's not like that. The things I want you to think about are you having fun? That's the most important skill and thing that's going to keep you playing. Are you having fun? Are you stressed out where you're at? You know, if you're stressed out, worried about, am I a beginner, am I intermediate? That's not going to help your progress. The single biggest thing to keep you playing and keep you improving is having fun. The second thing I would think about most is your rate of improvement. So I'd much rather play with a beginner person that's improving at a high rate of improvement than an intermediate player that's stuck in the same, you know, 20 things that they know how to play. So it's much more important to be, you know, improving at a higher rate, even if you're at a lower level. So those are some things I want you to think about when you're rating yourself. And again, you can kind of go through this checklist maybe once a year or every 6 months and kind of, again, identify those points, those gaps in your playing that you need to fill, and work on filling them with some of the practice points I've provided. All right, hopefully this helps you out. All right, good luck.